Welcome to Salon 4. Salon is a production of One Week Critique, a nonprofit that offers educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. You can learn more about us and our programs by visiting oneweekcritique.com. I'm Matthew Schmidt, and tonight we are featuring two fine writers, Shonda Buchanan and Adam al-Sirgany. Shonda will start us off tonight. Pushcart Prize nominee, Oxfam Ambassador, USC Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities Fellow, and City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs Master Artist Fellow. Shonda Buchanan is the author of 5 books, including the award-winning memoir, Black Indian. Shonda, take it away when you're ready.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start the reading with some poems from my first book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians, which the title actually is a take on Virginia Woolf's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I wanted the same kind of um, exploration, discussion, discourse around the Afro-Indigenous heritage that title gave to Virginia Woolf. And I wanted some people to be afraid too. So I'm going to start with, as we're talking about home and Kalamazoo, I was born and raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and this first book really pulls together poems from my family, from heritage, being a person who considers herself bi and triracial, particularly because I've, traced that ancestry down. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems from this book, Who's Afraid of Black Indians? And the first poem is called, I'm going to do this one. Okay, Evidence, from my great aunt Catherine. For every direction we stood in, she never showed up, not to anything. Graduation, wedding, spelling bee, track meet, she was as directionless and unaccountable as faith. Twice she saw love turn to blood on a white sheet under her sister, and from that moment closed the flap of her tent to us all. But she was our proof, last of the manuals, the buckskin litany of our North Carolina trek from Sampson County to Jim Crow, Tennessee, into KKK, Indiana, and finally Hush Your Mouth, Michigan. She was the grinding of our teeth, humming of bone against bone in labor, but she was never there. In her dreams, she wore only buckskin. Everywhere else, she wore white. It was easier that way. A white face erased of tribe or color, a beautiful face wooden by loss of beads and drum, turquoise-less, fanless, no feathers in her hair. She watched us, her kin, from a distance, wary of our mulatto hunger, and we were always hungry, clinging, sweaty, smelling of salt and swamp, country Black Indians, licking at her forgetfulness like snakes against her ankles in a bad dream. If she ever dies, we will all show up to her funeral anyway, gazing down at her, this stranger who seemed to hate us, this alabaster Indian doll, and we will wonder why. The kinks in our hair, how the combs that got stuck there made her angry. We will flank her totemless casket, protective, shy, without any other reason than she was blood. I wonder when I read that poem, does my Aunt Catherine turn over in her grave? That's why I didn't tell you my family history. My Aunt Catherine, she said that to me once. I said, Aunt Catherine, I'd love to talk to you about the family because I'm working on this memoir, Black Indian. And she said, I'm not talking to you about my family. And that was it's like, ooh, that was a moment. I'll just read one more poem from this book and then I'll move to my Nina Simone book. I used to live in Virginia, in Hampton, Virginia. And I would do a thing that they do in Hampton, which is visit plantations because you could throw a rock and hit a plantation in Virginia, North Carolina. And this poem came from visiting Berkeley Plantation, which was the first place supposedly that a Thanksgiving was held, and how appropriate here we are in American Indian Heritage Month. And I think this poem is appropriate for the time. So um, for the slaves and the indigenous folks of Berkeley Plantation, Charles City, Virginia, where in 1619 the first Thanksgiving happened. It is my fault when we enter the master's house unaccompanied. My friend and I, we are wrists in the sleeves of yesteryear. Berkeley Plantation, on the James River, sassafras summer. It is the end of a hot day in Virginia. The empty house, its silences beckon me. Hallway is wide, decent rooms, cardboard smell, stately portraits above mantels, white faces, chipped porcelain and china, things Black and indigenous hands have cleaned. My friend pauses. I sigh. We are the stories hundreds of years ago that these white interpreters tell, yet my picture is not in this house. Y'all can't be here, a voice calls. She comes dressed in petticoat and apron, an interpreter. Stern, seems upset that we trace their footsteps. She has forgotten her training, thinks we might take something, I can tell. No, it's private property now. Property, property, that word again. Will I ever know the lace of it? A slave's life, a denied drink of water, womb vacuumed, arms empty of a child. Shouldn't admission be free for us? I turned to go, but instead turned back, asking, if my ancestors worked this land, shouldn't I be able to walk it? Suddenly smaller, eyes alert, aware, she slowly shakes her head. What would I steal? Take back the betrayal of humanity, the stories interpreters tell, the long, long ache of time. Um, thank you, Adam. So I'm moving to the new book, The Lost Songs of Nina Simone, and what a fun and wonderful and daunting process to write about Nina Simone, civil rights, icon, pianist, concert pianist, composer. My gosh, just such a international star for so many people. And every time she has performed, even if she's been, so she did have, of course, if anyone knows Nina Simone's story and narrative, she grew up in Tryon, North Carolina. She started playing piano at 3. She was a prodigy that the town gathered together and basically said, we want to support her. So they put their money together, and she started to take lessons with a woman called Ms. Mazzy. And Ms. Mazzy basically taught her classical piano, how to play classical piano, even though Nina already knew how to play gospel and, piano, that kind of a thing, because she grew up in the church. So she had this beautiful and incredible and amazing life. And in the book, and then also hard, I have to say, I'm so sorry. She was also an alcoholic, and she suffered from bipolarism, which she didn't get diagnosed for that until probably when she was about 60. And she died in France, in La Rue, if I'm saying that correctly, in the south of France. But I start the book because I wanted to do the exploration of, how did Anina get here? And so I start the book with a poem called Tryon. And I'm looking at the ancestral trek into this land. Hulking mountain slanted into peach tree sky, sliver of hope, skinned her ancestors' already wounded antebellum eyes as they looked up, trying to follow each last stone until it disappeared like a fist, like a small granite fist, into God's abysmal mouth. This place, a tangle of hard truths inculcating their faith, this wet amber of red oaks, country grapes, and swamp rushes, boiling sweet Carolina heat, wasn't anyone's first choice, but somehow they'd gotten here. Abacus borders erased, cold bodies weeping with scent of swamp and moon dust, and a black girl's not here yet voice, her breath, her crimson slid up from their bare souls as they passed watchful alabaster giant, that mountain, its tongue powdered in squash blossom blue. The mountain said nothing, recognizing their toasted, scarred skin, their thick, parched tongues freckled with an inheritance unmatched, unimaginable. Trions. So that's kind of even before Nina, just kind of how did a Nina get here? I'm going to move up to a poem where I want to say, there she is. So this is Eunice at 8. In the documentary, there's actually several, but this one, What Happened, Miss Simone, there's a moment where she says, I was always um, an outsider. It's something like that. She says, I was always set apart because of her talent. And when I saw this picture of her in her autobiography, she's 8 years old, and that the picture just called to me. So I wanted to do the ekphrastic um, poem and write something about it. Eunice at 8. In the picture, you are sitting on a stone wall that seems part man-made, part nature's twist and bend against itself. Behind you is a plain wooden shack, someone's house, Miss Mazzie's, maybe yours, the one you were born in that later burned down. But an imprint, the sweetening happened here. You're wearing an elbow-long shirt with 2-inch lapels, a girl's vest, and a cotton skirt with white stockings and black patent leather buckle-up shoes. Hands folded in your lap seem to signal submission for the picture. Yet your braids poke out at the ends, and your hair looks freshly greased and pressed, maybe smelling of distant Fulani fires and future pearls. Ghost tendrils above your head say, town prodigy, dark girl, daddy's girl, preacher's kid. The small hill and fall trees losing their leaves. Behind you are your first adoring fans. Your smile is politely tolerant, not quite shy. Charcoal eyes peer up at the camera, asking questions that will never be answered. There, in this moment, you are protected. No one sees the broken thing in your planet heart. And I'll just read one more poem. Thank you all. So I think this is a poem. I'm going to read a section. I'm just going to read a piece of this one. I have a suite of Nina, about Nina. And gosh, how many? There are 4 or 5 poems in this. But no. So sorry. I'm going to read this one. Voila. Carnegie Hall. This is the Nina that we know. When we think of Nina, well, I don't know if anyone actually knows Nina, but when we think of Nina Simone, we think of her playing piano and we think of her singing and what is this one? Why you gonna fly, blackbird? You ain't never gonna fly. Why you wanna fly, blackbird? You ain't never gonna fly. Ooh, Ooh, ooh. Carnegie Hall. Tenderly, fingers on unforgiving white teeth pressing raped black bone, Nina taps foot. Back ramrod straight, cloaked in cream gown as prisms of melody fill hollow parts of her country mouth. She is again a child of the Middle South, crossing ragged train tracks in porous sun, not playing Bach, a queen haunted by her kills, returning to herself, excavating ghosts, clinging to salty Atlantic Ocean's crimson past, circling North Star axis of sound, vibrating in black holes, blinking in and out across the stage, plunging her into darkness until she lands. Nina plays and pounds until her knuckles crack, throat aches until she spits and shakes, fever comes, whiskey and gin peel from her in ancient pleats of sweat. It feels like forever, like wandering in buried tombs, like this moment will never come again. And she punches and slaps and holds them, those ghosts, not back, until the night, and then the day, and then twilight, and the night. Inside her bouquet of flowers, dressed, she is a hematite stone on a hard piano bench, a forgotten talisman, atop a looted temple, a pillaged Egyptian shrine where we used to pray, a goddess, flecked, golden, immortal. No one sees her after the music stops. No one ever sees. It is a glorious death. Ooh, ooh. Thank you.
Thank you, Shonda. Next up, we have Adam. Adam al-Sirgany is an Arab American writer and editor, born and raised in the driftless Midwest. He holds degrees in creative writing from Knox College, University of Arizona, and Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, and teaches developmental editing for the UCLA Extension Program in writing, editing, and publishing. He's the acquisitions and developmental editor for the independent press SFWP, which is now in its 28th year. More Hell, the collection from which he'll be reading this evening, was published by Whiskey Tit Press in August 2025. Adam, when you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you. Um, man, I uh John asked me to do this reading and asked me to do it with Shonda, and tough act to follow. Uh so I'm gonna do a really short piece, kind of trying to stay on theme a little bit, and then also because John had made the connection that both of us write a great deal about music. I'm going to read a piece from a longer story I don't usually read from, uh, that deals with music, kind of, sort of. Um, so my collection, More Hell, is set in the Driftless area, which, for those of you who don't know, is a mysterious little patch of the Midwest that didn't get leveled by the Pleistocene Ice Age, so it's not as flat. And at least the portion of the Midwest I grew up in um, was indigenously inhabited by the Meskwaki people. And so here's a little short story wherein let's say a time traveling settler tries to explain something about the fact that those folks aren't there anymore. Driftless. Years later, I see it, driving through Oklahoma en route to Arizona. Stroud, okay. which isn't anywhere and so no different from what have become Stockton, Illinois, or Elizabeth, or South Wayne, Wisconsin, the places named for their replacements, the women who fended off Indians with muskets, God knows, but of this change. I spoke French 200 years ago, and the Sauk boys spoke something not French, but closer to it than American. The seasons of Mississippi trade holding sounds to the fronts of their mouths. There are sadnesses for which I am responsible. A Dakota girl sold to an Arkansas trader for a case of whiskey darker than her navel. A Chickasaw touched too many times and left swelling when I went west. The tin casino outside Stroud, though, the ceramic buffalo bought with tribal funds, painted white and with meaningless hieroglyphs, arrows, teepees, other buffalo painted with buffalo, smaller, smaller. We were only entertaining the Sauk boys, Black Hawk left sitting on the river. Nothing to do all day, just the three of them looking at canoes crossing the east bank. You get so quickly old, you forget there are things a boy doesn't know, not to drink with pens or pistols. You never think to tell a lit fellow not to punch the ground. If he does, you rap his hand. Never mention it. I'm going to take a prerogative moment in between pieces here. So I'm actually the executive director of One Week Critique, which is my nepotistic reason for being here, apart from having a book come out. Um, uh, we started back in really 2019, 2020 as a project in uh, returning feedback for folks who might not always get feedback on singular pieces in a week or less. We became a nonprofit in 2020, and we've really expanded our programming. We're entirely volunteer run. And we've expanded our programming based on the interest of our volunteers for that reason. John Riccio, who's with us here tonight, has helped organize several readings. So shout out to John for doing that. He also does some fantastic lesson plans that are free and available on our website, oneweekcritique.com. Matthew is the president of our board and does so many of the things to keep One Week Critique running. We have a number of other wonderful volunteers, including Ingrid Wensler and Spud Schmidt, without whom we would not, as artists, know how to manage our own finances, among others. We also provide weekly workshops at the Iowa City Public Library in their teen space. As well as an interview series where we look at early drafts and final or finished drafts of pieces, which are also available for your own edification or for use in your classrooms. We hope you use them. Of course, we hope that you donate before the end of the year. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can write it off your taxes if that's your bag. And also, we hope you use them, right? We've created those materials in order for them to help the writing community thrive. So, but thank you to John and Matthew for putting this on and for giving us a little space to read some weird stuff. So this is from a piece called Broke Down Palace, which for those of you who don't know is a Grateful Dead song. And it's a story about two young teenage boys who are hanging out too much with an older male neighbor who is perhaps negatively influencing them. I'll put it that way. Far back as I can remember, Ronnie rode a black Indian with burgundy hubs. Burgundy so dark you had to stare at it going by to know your eyes hadn't played a trick in the sun. When we visited him, he would brag to us about cat houses. Wherever else he seemed to be going on that motorcycle, to a bar, to the shop, to the grocery store, cat houses were always his endpoint, what home was to our parents in the evenings, his place of refuge, his shelter from the storm. This was Iowa at a time when cat houses were nearly gone, a fond memory of middle-aged men and the daydreamed salvation of boys like Stryker and me were becoming. A place folks knew you were going to go. You could say what you needed there and get it, and nobody judged you for that, and no one asked questions. At the time, still, and I think now, Stryker and I didn't consider that summer as being about Ronnie Bleecker. We were young enough to have, between us, 3 or 4 occupations and no ambitions yet to relive or to be past what we'd lived through already. Young enough to be without suspicions, except maybe over Stryker's father, who was a forgiving man but hopeful his son would become a doctor. Stryker did become a doctor, eventually, though, a PhD in philosophy, and long after his old man died of a heart attack. We were 18 when he died, early college. Night before the funeral, we rolled a joint, Box of Rain, playing off a recording I made at Alpine Valley, realizing for the first time we could only forget what we'd repeated. We rewound that tape and played it again and again, the words to ease us, Uncle Jerry's solo dropping water into our sorrow, each note just behind its feeling. That was in the future, though. Now it's in the past. That summer, 79, time was still linear and it was short. That's what we kept saying, like we knew what it meant or what it had meant. That summer was about running around searching for mythical, easy girls who would train on us before disappearing into Ronnie's cat houses, or like men accidenting casually onto some cat house door. It was about magic and anarchy. It was about being who we thought we were and never being judged. The trouble with our attitude was that there were, of course, no such girls, not single-minded and unabashed and lovely, not at 13, not older. There weren't women or girls desperate for us with our soft cheeks and cowlicks, and at some point we knew there weren't, and we stopped wanting what wasn't, and the whole time we talked and talked about what we'd wanted without ever quite saying they weren't coming. Ronnie Bleeker's house had a 2-door garage. It stood out on our block because it made the house seem vaster. He had the Indian and a Chevy C10 he drove around in the wintertime into his job in Cedar Rapids. Ronnie was a pale man with a pale man's freckled tan. When the weather was nice, he'd leave the truck in the drive, working in the garage in the half dark with one door closed, whichever was farthest from the sun. Stryker and I always knew when Ronnie was home that way, and we nearly never took him by surprise. We'd come down the block at full volume, singing "I Want to Be Sedated," or going on and again about how great Raquel Welch looked in her wet dress and Animal, those long slits up the thigh. When we arrived, Ronnie would be lying on his back with Indian on a prop stand, unbolting the clutch in a yogic pose. Or he'd be squatting beside the bike, pulling off side plates and washing them in a basin of soap and water. Most times he'd wait for us to come in and laugh and say, "Raquel Welch, boy, you want to see a real pair of legs? You got to look at Faye Dunaway. God damn, Chinatown broke my heart." Ronnie was never a punk kind of guy. His garage was always busy with the dead, blues for Allah mostly, and 60s rock and roll blues, the Stones, Janis Joplin, Dusty Springfield. He just played it, and because he was the adult, we tolerated it, liked it even, though I'd never have said so, even to myself. And Ronnie, he tolerated us, letting us talk, talking with us, all of us sharing a joint. By the music, 1979 was a summer of loss and love. Near 14 years into their relationship, my father tried to seduce my mother again, leaving the radio on during dinner in hopes of singing along with Roger Voudouris. The girls in our grade were meanwhile already crying into hairbrushes about how the loves they'd had had hearts of glass. All that lost hand-holding. It was prescient, maybe, because while Stryker and I would abandon punk shortly after, it was years still before acid bands with their good vibes and love and honesty would sink into my sense of romance. I saw girls who were good looking as something else, another class, and when a few of them eventually had the bad sense to keep company with me, I treated them like the fly-by-night daydreams I thought they might be. In college, late in college, I spent 7 years taking classes here and there, frying eggs, bartending, rushing cross country to trip for a couple days, watching the dead at Red Rocks or in San Francisco. Late in college, the woman who would be my wife and after 15 years leave me for another man, a friend, my girlfriend then, she was smoking pot with me on the back porch of a house we were renting. The house was white, vinyl sided and roofed green. You could smell the wet mold from the vinyl and the earthy old tar of the roof shingles fallen in the grass. We'd been drinking beer all day. It was hot, August or September. The house was on the Iowa River and it was humid, but the breeze off the water cooled your arms, your cheeks, the curve toward your back where your hairline meets your neck. I asked her, Maria, would you marry me? No plan, no ring. I just said it, and she put her hand on my thigh and said, Yeah, I guess. She smiled. All right, I said. I see all the kids on campus and think maybe I'm not getting old enough. Not hell to be wrong, she said. Just hell to be different. Yeah, I said, I guess. Then I thought about it and took another drag. Hell not to be yourself, I said. She said, That's another thing entirely. And she was right, or at least I think she was, which is why I am always going back to it. Stryker and I both took a shot at Carolyn Saunders, who wasn't the most attractive girl we knew, but the most attractive girl we knew our age with enough attitude about her to be pursued. She had black hair she kept in a ponytail low off one side of her head. The side switched. That was the joke. She was ambidextrous, able to use her hands, Stryker said, any way she chose. We bumped into Carolyn at the grocery store, and Stryker whispered something into her ear, his secret beside the baked goods and raisins. She laughed, and he walked off, and nothing else seemed to happen. I saw her about 3 days later, coming out of the laundromat, and decided Stryker had failed. I gave her his use your hands line. She was in a t-shirt and tight jeans, washing and taking some of the blue off of. She was holding a basket of laundry still hot from the dryer. I was hopeful. I could have died. Carolyn didn't care for either of us. So I tried the same line with Christine Simon, who wore a lot of collared shirts and who Stryker said was preppy. She was, but I rejected that notion after she made out with me behind the elementary school gym. When I tried again a week later, one of my hands went too far. Stryker and I agreed to preppy after that. He tried to start with Abby Collins. I thought she was ugly, too skinny, long-nosed. Now I see it. What was there, the body she was growing into, and I think she liked him. Enough to put up with whatever he did, which I guess wasn't much. For the whole couple of weeks they were together, I kept asking, Did you get at it? He kept saying, Nah, man. Real quiet, like he was serious. Or, warming up. So next time, I'd say, maybe. He'd say, I don't know. And one time I said, maybe next time we can see her together. He said, maybe. I guess I'll think about it. If he kept seeing her after that, he didn't mention it. And at some point, it must have ended because eventually I would have known. That was all years ago. I don't wish it had been different. Once, a while after I kissed Christine Simon, Stryker and I went over to Ronnie Bleeker's. I'd let a little air out of my front tire. I didn't need an excuse to see Ronnie or even to tell him about Christine, but even when I thought about it, I started telling myself a story that made it bigger than it was. I guess I wanted Ronnie to be looking at something and I wanted Stryker to be looking at Ronnie, so when I gave them my big fish, it would feel a little casual, drift by into fact. Stryker and I walked the bike over to Ronnie's. On the one side of the garage, the dark side then, was a big green air compressor with one of those dramatic gauges our fathers talked so much of blowing off into someone's skull who hadn't been watching the pressure rise. Ronnie took the front tire off my bike and turned the air compressor on. While it rattled and filled, he pulled out a tree and some chewing tobacco and talked a while about Cannonball Adderley. We just sat there smoking. Ronnie was playing the In New York album, kept pulling the needle back to hear Cannonball say, you get a lot of people who are supposed to be hip, and they act like they're supposed to be hip, which makes a big difference. You see what I mean? While the horns started, Ronnie kept talking through them, repeating that line, or, hipness is a state of mind, not a state of mind, it's a fact of life, and once or twice landing on, you don't decide you're hip, it just happens that way. You see what I mean? Sometimes when he talked, Ronnie would tap his skull can against his hip in time with the music. And I remember thinking that afternoon as he pointed it at me that that can between his fingers wasn't really an accusation. It was a circle his words turned on. You didn't really know where in the room they were falling or if they fell at all. I felt up Christine Simon, I said. Don't know her. Ronnie said. She's preppy, Stryker said. Stryker's gonna fuck Abby Collins. I said, maybe. I was feeling a little alienated and a little magnanimous. Of course, truth told, I don't know why I said that. Shit, Ronnie said. That compressor makes everything sound out of time. He took my tire and kept feeling around it with both hands. How'd this sumbitch get so flat? You'd think there'd be a hole in there somewhere. Probably just a little one. Just can't hear it, said Stryker. Probably, said Ronnie, but I ain't listening. He looked at the compressor gauge and put the nozzle to the tire. Don't know her either. My advice is don't sleep with easy women. Penicillin can't fix everything. Abby isn't easy, Stryker said. Doesn't matter, Ronnie said. He turned the compressor off. Anyway, whatever you do, you have to learn to be careful and keep your mouth shut. Keep her name out of it anyhow. Yeah, Stryker said. Ronnie handed back the tire and told me I should practice putting it on myself. So I did, and Stryker helped. Should last you a day or two, Ronnie said. If it's a leak, we'll know tomorrow. Yeah, I said. That's right. He said, boys, pussy ain't everything. Right, Stryker said. Right, I said. What the hell am I telling you for? Ronnie said. Cannonball was somewhere into Gemini finally. Takes a man a long time to get that right. Can't tell some people some things. They gotta burn it down personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. So I know it's difficult sometimes to start off the question session, so I'm going to start it off, and everybody else can think of a question if they have one. Um, when I listen to both of you read, even if we weren't talking about music in the works, I do feel a very particular cadence or rhythm that you both read with. Um, so my question is, do you read the work the same way every time you read it, or do you try to? Or do you let the feeling of the moment, the night, whatever, dictate how you're going to read the piece? Like, is your breathing different? Is your emphasis different? So on.
Yeah. Um, I definitely choose pieces according to the night, and sometimes that's about, right, theme or vibe or what have you. Um, the pieces I read tonight, I very rarely would do in a like in proximity, like in same place performance. Some of that has to do with, all of the pieces I wrote in this book were obsessively written to a single song, which is almost always referenced within the piece, either as the title or just in the piece um, somewhere. And so there's some semblance of that cadence that kind of makes it in. Um, but also, I very much write in character in a kind of method acting sort of approach. So most of my characters are me spending a lot of time trying to get into someone else's head as deeply as I can. And so I think yeah, like sitting down and reading is a really weird thing for me. I feel like I automatically turn into a more uh conventional reader when I'm sitting here where it's like uh doing scales or something on a piano. If you're like uh you're on a new piano and it's not your piano, you're like making sure you can like slip keys in the way that you normally would or something. I don't know if that answers your question very effectively. I'm sure Shonda has a much more effective answer.
No, I don't have a much more eloquent answer. I think that was incredible, a great answer. I mean, the poems, I hear the cadence in your work as well, just incredibly gorgeous. When you were reading, actually, I was hearing, "Welcome to the Hotel California, such a lovely place," right? So, um, I think music is a huge part of my work for many reasons. Culturally, people ask me, "What? So, do you plan to sing with your work, or how do you do that?" And my answer is that I don't remember a moment where song wasn't significant in my family, in my childhood. So, um, I had bronchitis as a kid, and the song that my mom sang to me was Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, to just like ease my breathing, to help me live, essentially. And I have a line in a poem saying something like, "I was bred off plantation prayer and a dream." And so with this book, with the Nina Simone book, music is it's everywhere, even if it's not in the book. I do try to use some elements of her, particularly when I'm writing in her voice. I try to use some of her cadence as a speaker. And then when I'm reading some of the poems that I think match some of her songs, I try to maybe sing a couple of riffs of the song. Um, uh, one of the poems in here that I didn't read is the poem about when she wrote Mississippi Goddamn. And I do think when I start to sing it, um, it's I don't go into the cadence of it, but again, it's kind of it's allowing people to understand that these poems were not written in a vacuum. These poems come from a place of musicality, come from a place of a musician's struggles, come from a place of a woman's struggles, a woman who didn't want to be a mother, who was abused, alcoholic, but also happened to be an international star. So personally in my life, music is always there. And then in the poems, I hear, even if I'm not feeling, you said, do you read the poems every time in the same way? No, I don't. Do you read the poems based off of the audience? It depends. Depends on the kind of space that you're in. And but I will say I'm still connected to the poems, like a word or a line when I wrote it. I'm still connected, and I still feel like um, for lack of a better word, um, the power with which I wanted to tell that story. So yeah, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you both. Excellent. Anyone else have any questions for our readers?
I do. I have about two questions, and thank you so much for both of your words. I remember writing down my favorite parts. Shonda, those ghosts, not Bach. Nice monosyllabic line there. And then hematite and piano bench, nice 3+3 rhythm. And then Adam, you had that phrase unbolting the clutch in a yogic pose. And then his secret beside the baked goods, all awesome. And then even doctor and striker, that nice little kind of two-syllable interchange we have with that. And Shonda, you had talked a little bit about, well, when you write in the voice of Nina, and what I do when I have, say, a lot of workloads, one of my go-to musicians It's a Soviet concert violinist named Victoria Mullova, who at the height of the Cold War defected from the Soviet Union, left behind the state-owned Stradivari on a hotel bed in Sweden, and just started a whole new life in the early 80s. And whenever I have this very pressing workload, or I have a lot of administrative items that I need to do, or if I just need to think about how do I edit a larger project and I need to look at it in terms of 10-hour increments or 8 hours or 5 hours, as if, for example, I were training to be a competition winning violinist of the early 80s, aka Victoria Mullova. So sometimes I'm thinking, what would Victoria Mullova do if she had to grade so many classes and balance the admin components and try to edit a 40-page collection of poems into something cohering into a chapbook? So, Shonda, do you ever, other than channeling the voice of Nina in your work, do you ever look at sort of the what would Nina do with this kind of a workload? Or, and Adam, do you have a musician that you say, what would so and so do when I need to manage my workload? And how do you go to those places and how do you get to those mindsets?
I don't have anyone that I go to. Oh, that's not true, actually. I'm just gonna say it. When I'm feeling stressed, basically, my fallback is Beyonce. And so it's like I'm a diva. I'm a because I'm like Beyonce's the diva, so I could do this. If she says she's the diva, I could do it. So musically, like that is the thing, I might and then it just releases like all my stress. However, I wrote my first novel between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. when my daughter was asleep and I didn't have to work. This is many years ago, but I wrote it to Cesara Ivoriez, if I'm saying that correctly, the artist from Cape Verde. And the music, because I couldn't sing along with it because I don't speak Portuguese. But the music, the rhythm, her words, I mean, I could intonate, I could feel some of the things that were in the music, but it also allowed me kind of a landscape that I could translate into the novel. So that was like a really pivotal and important moment, I think, for me, just to have that space and also to stay awake. Yeah.
Yeah, I never think of myself in terms of Beyonce, but I do love her Sasha Fierce technique um of giving yourself freedom through persona. I think the artist I most admire is John Coltrane. There's this fantastic story that a drummer tells in Ken Burns Jazz about um, having to play through like a 45-minute solo and his hand getting so sweaty that he accidentally throws the stick past John Coltrane's ear, and going up to John, who's the leader of that group at the time, and John like apologizing to John, and John just going like, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought you know, thought like I'm tired of listening to the son of a bitch play, like or whatever, right? And uh there's something about that like uh that self-presence, right? Like Coltrane also supposedly would, um like leave a dinner party and like at his own house because he just had an idea or something and he would just go upstairs and start playing, right? He used to call up Sonny Rollins and just play a lick into the phone when he had an idea, and Sonny Rollins would do the same thing back. And I think there's something about that sort of like I don't want to call it childish, but I don't have a better comparison, like that kind of like toddler impulsivity of like, nah, this is what I'm doing, this is what it is right now. And I do conceptualize that you might have thrown that stick, but I didn't stop my solo. And I think there's something about that kind of um, uh, belief in the art that is a belief in like doing the weird thing you're doing because it's the thing that you feel compelled to do, that I meditate on a lot and try and find that like of like, okay, this is this is just this is how it's got to be in the way that I've got to do it because I'm driven to do it this way, and it'll you can dig it or not dig it or whatever. And I don't I I don't know that I have the ability to put my Stradivarius on a bed and walk away from it. But I maybe that's because I've meditated on that other thing so much more.
I love that you mentioned jazz. Dexter Gordon's Around Midnight, like that whole album is something that I can write to. Just thinking about music as well. During COVID, one thing that really helped me write was I would listen to on YouTube, there's a like an hour long African um playlist. And like for some reason that the playlist while I'm working and preparing lessons, it just became this like a background soundtrack, and it was just incredible. I mean, it was everyone from Hugh Masekela, Miri Makeba, I'm saying that right. No, I think I'm saying it wrong. Um, Indege Cello, she was on there. I mean, there was, I mean, just old school. Oh, what's the one? Houston Do. I mean, Senegalese artists. So it was just such a beautiful. So music for me, music is definitely important for the writing as well. That's a great question, John. I just want to say thank you to John for inviting me to do this. Thank you so very much. And Adam, it was so incredible to read with you. So this is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I do have one more question, but of course, if other people have questions too. Well, I mean, it's interesting that we were talking about, okay, who gets us into the mindset of when we need to do our work and our creative work, and then our day-to-day work as part of the artist citizen. And I think for me, about maybe a year before I knew half of the people on this current Zoom call is when I discovered ABBA, and in the most bizarre way, because it was Waterloo was actually, I think, on Coast to Coast AM art, with the Art Bell, and so I would listen to that when I was working at the food bank, because as one is processing data entry, you need a little bit of a distraction. And from Waterloo, then I wound up buying an ABBA Greatest Hits, and that 2012 to 2013 window, the year before the MFA, I even told students this last week, I don't know where I would have been without ABBA. And I think I'm coming back into my ABBA cycle. It's like every maybe 13 years I re-enter the ABBA orbit. But I began my 2025 year doing a lot of editorial work and journal type work. Surprisingly enough, with Casey and the Sunshine Band and Boogie Shoes. And then for some reason I fell into the Casey and the Sunshine rabbit hole. And their music it's quite repetitive, I will say. They're maybe a little bit challenged for coming up with new lyrics, but there was something just about boogie shoes, boogie shoes, boogie shoes, and it came back and it came back and it made the checklist of items I needed to get done. They were checked off quite in a hurry, but with polish. So
I
thank you,
fell in
Casey.
I fell into a Portishead rabbit hole one time too. So it's funny.
Right, we need our rabbit holes. And then, but to speak about the fact that here I am in a food bank in 2012, and I will forever link my ABBA life starting, entering data at a food bank. What do you talk about, Adam, with when we critique, and Shonda with your students, when the subject of place, because I know in Shonda we heard some Virginia and North Carolina, and Adam, the driftless Midwest. How do you talk about this large concept of what it is like to write about place? And how do you get students to open up with their writing when it comes to that topic, which I think is near and dear to a lot of writers' hearts?
Yeah, that's a big, wild question. I think especially now, right? Because I mean, it really is age dependent in some ways, both because, right, like, um, some of my students say at like UCLA vary in age anywhere from like 22 to 60, right? Whereas like uh, when we do workshops at the Iowa City Public Library, we're talking about uh, kids who are 11 to 19. And that 11 to 19 range of, like insofar as they've been out of their own space, right? Like in some ways you only understand your own space by the contrast of it. Um, it's often in kind of contained family travel or going on a band trip or something like that. Um, and so I think especially for those younger folks who are also, at least this generation, very digitally oriented. So the way they experience even their home space can be very different. Right? Like trying to take them to those moments where, right, like they went on a long vacation with a family, if that's something that they're sort of privileged to have, or like trying to contrast, right, their home and their grandmother's home or something. Like I often do exercises that ideally, hopefully don't create binaries, but at least create um, a way of looking from that other space, right? Like pulling them out of the cave, so to speak, right? I think with older folks, what I tend to do, right, like adult folks in workshop settings, I spend a lot more time trying to get people to think about what viscerally and sensorially brings emotion to them, right? Like I don't know if there's always sort of a Flaubertian perfect image for the page, but like I went to a reading the other day and someone did this very lovely reading, but all of the adjectives were sort of like, this person is 12 years old. This is the street address of the place, and I'm reading off the street address. It's a very skilled writer who didn't sort of emotionally hit me because there was nothing about the description that created the world other than the fact of the city of, right, St. Paul. And I don't know St. Paul well enough to be connected with that, but there may be a building or the way that building looks or the texture of granite or something that would really bring that home for me. And I think that starts with where the writer's at. And so I often do these little exercises where I encourage someone to describe a house by describing a floor panel, or like to describe their parent in terms of like the way a drawer smelled when they opened it, or something of that kind. I try and get them to really lock in to those that minutia out of which place is built, and it usually sort of the panoply of space and the unique character of it and even the language of it seems to emerge from there. At least in my experience of trying to do it. But I've never sat down and tried like a place-based workshop with folks, right? Like I think I've you know focused on the small and let it grow, right? I really believe in seeds. So
Yeah, well said. I usually start with the premise of Wallace Stegner's "Tell me where you're from, and I will tell you who you are." And then I take people through sensory workshops to help them access memory. And then in accessing memory, that helps them connect to place. The old school thing we used to say in my undergrad, or my professors would say, was a sense of place and time, right? And now the thing that I have been saying probably for the last, like, yeah, 10 years, I guess I could say, because of the when the book came out, it's landscape writing. It's, how do you write from the earth, like the place that you stand? How do you write from the place that you stand, the neighborhood, your house, the room in which you spent your childhood life? who are you crossing paths with in Indian country? And then they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, this is Indian country. So now you got to start thinking about landscape in a deeper way. So I think, yeah, I definitely take people through those workshop elements to help them access memory. And it's through location of a place, it's through the people, their family members. Sometimes I have a question that I ask, and I say, and this is one where I knew I was like, ooh, I'm making them go deep. And I'll say something like, write about your least favorite grandparent and where they were when you realized you didn't like them, or something like that, and where you were, where they were. Or I'll say, write about the person you love the most who hurt you the most, and where were you when that hurt took place. And then suddenly they're like, whoosh, the memory is like, bam, it's there, because they can't hide from the honesty of that moment. And usually like they can smell the place, they can see the place, they can feel the place, they can taste the place. So yeah, that's how I do it, John.
All right. Thank you, Shonda. Thank you, Adam. In this digital world, we're all in the same place in different places at the same time, which is amazing. Um, Please check out Shonda and Adam's work. Check out One Week Critique and have a lovely day.